Hey everyone, this is Randy Mauldin with supplychainmanagement.jobs, Jack Quinn Solutions, and CPSM training. And tonight we are here to talk about how to build your supply chain crisis team. Why you're here is to develop an intuitive ability to respond to crisis when crisis happens. And that crisis could be as little as a part missing and you got to find it right now, or a huge dramatic crisis where some geopolitical issue has now shut down your supply chain. For example, steel tariffs. All of a sudden your costs have completely increased and you need to do something about that and respond to that. What you'll take away is a structured workflow on how to set up your supply chain crisis team as a buyer. And then from there, you'll be able to do this all the time, every day, or when often as you need to. You'll be able to find a crisis, respond versus react in a way that solves the problem. If this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe, like, and share so that your colleagues can also enjoy this information and learn from this information. Especially if you're part of a team, you want everyone operating on the same point of view. So sharing this training will help develop your team into a stronger supply chain resilient team that you need for the current economy. What we're going to do tonight is we have with us Captain Mr. Howard Knapp. He will be sharing with us his experiences and what he's going through. And then we're going to break it down and put some structure around it based on how to do this in a process that over time will become intuitive and you'll be able to react. And so, Howard, why don't you go ahead and just kind of introduce yourself for those that are joining us for the first time, learn a little bit about you and tell them where they can find out more about you, because we really want to get into the heart of tonight's discussion as quickly as possible so people can get the most from this as quick as they can. So, Howard, go ahead.
Absolutely. Thanks, Randy. Say, everyone, Howard Knapp, Captain Howard Knapp. So started my supply chain journey with a supply chain management degree from the Auburn University, War Eagle. And then also commission. And also I got my commission in the Army National Guard as a logistics officer. Luckily, I didn't join the Marines like Randy, so made a good choice.
Right.
Also, I would say that my experiences are quite unique, right? I've been in aerospace manufacturing for 8 years. I've been in roles for all the way back from the warehouse to production supervisor, then also as a buyer in multiple companies. While at the same time, I was actually serving as an Army officer, as a logistics officer. So I was getting that dual experience at the same time, getting the military side and also the civilian. Also got my recent CPSM certification. Randy was my teacher. Thank you for that. And I would say that my combination of military and civilian background has really allowed me to have a deep and unique understanding of supply chain resilience and geopolitical issues. Also wanted to mention, check out my website, hnap.com. That's HKNAPP.com. You can purchase my new book there, which covers a lot of these topics and other topics. Title of the book is Secrets to an Unbreakable Supply Chain. Great book. Highly recommend it. Best investment you'll have. And it's, like I said, covers a lot of topics about supply chain resilience with a lot of easy, practical steps that you can apply. Randy?
Yeah, that's great. And what I like to highlight to everyone is, Howard's book was written with an action-focused type of information. Read it, implement. Read it, implement. And then, in my background is, I've been in the Marine Corps, as Howard mentioned, and I went through the Captain's Logistics Career Course as he did as well. And one thing I did learn was the Army knows how to do logistics and do it well. And one of the benefits in the military is that we are constantly building supply chains throughout the world to meet mission needs or to execute or to deliver to the customer. And there's always a crisis where there's something not delivered and you got to make things work. And we have learned through the military that there's a structured way to respond to these things so that you have calm focus in a chaotic scenario, just to focus on the mission and just get the job done. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And what I've learned over the years in training CPSM, Certified Professional Supply Management, is that there's a practice, there's a background of information that people have, and then they can pull levers when they need to, tap into information when they need it, but they got to have the information in their toolbox first. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to give you that toolbox, give you a couple more tools to put in your toolbox so you can be a resilient supply chain star that's out there to help your company stay successful as we go into uncertain economic times. Now,
Randy, I wanted to add
tonight,
something to that.
go ahead.
Randy, I did want to add something to that too, right? So the military, it's very important. We've always been resilient. That's always been the focus of supply chains in the military, right? Being ammunition, food, right? We need to get stuff to the soldiers that's on the front line. That's our business. That's always been the business, right? This supply chain resilience is, after COVID especially, is a new thing for a lot of people, but the military has always been focused on that.
Yeah, and like resilience for like you said, after COVID, people discovered the value of resilience, and they're starting to implement resilience and build their own safety stocks and do certain things where just in time just isn't there, and now they're kind of understanding that, and we're starting to see that, and just the military focus of being able to flex and move and not being tied, just having a skill set ready to respond to scenarios is really what we have that makes this training unique. And it's something we're going to talk about in our workshop that we're going to have in April that we'll talk about more towards the end. And you'll hear more about that at the end, a workshop where you can get all the things in detail that we're talking about tonight. But to get started tonight, what I'd like to do is have Howard share with us a recent experience he had where he had to implement a crisis response for his organization so that they could continue to deliver for the customer. And I don't want to steal any of his thunder. So Howard, take it away.
Everybody, right. So I want to also highlight that this is not an issue that I've only experienced at my current organization. I've experienced this everywhere I've worked, and I've heard stories like this so many times. Also want to highlight the importance of it's not just at my level as a buyer. It can also, this kind of structure can be implemented at every single level of the organization, right? A supply chain crisis and not necessarily, right, something big like Randy was saying, where it's a geopolitical issue, right? Like raw materials not available because of a war in Ukraine and Russia, right? It can be a simple thing as something's missing. And we'll go into that detail now. So several weeks ago, I was presented with a problem. There were several assemblies that were on our production floor. So we're an aerospace manufacturing company, right? This part was ready to go out, thousands of dollars, big complex order ready to go. But as soon as the parts were about ready to ship at the final assembly, they realized that, there's missing 25-cent screws. And these were needed to complete the build, right? 25 cents. I really want to highlight that. And this created, of course, an instant emergency, right? Thousands of dollars of products, can't get it out the door. Well, what happened next was, of course, as the buyer, the one in charge of procurement, becomes my instant emergency, right? So production control planning, same thing, contacted me with this issue and said, hey, we need about 3,000 screws in order to complete our order and get it out the door. We need this ASAP. Well, going back to my military experience again and understanding the importance of having good structure and being able to communicate effectively and efficiently, what I did was I created what is called an EOC, Emergency Operations Center, right? It sounds fancy, but it's also just the structure of how you make things. So I hopped into it.
Real quick, this is just you creating this. You didn't in the corporation didn't shut down all of a sudden focus on the EOC. This is something that you built as a buyer, and it's just you managing this emergency operations center. It's your center, and you're focused on this. And you're going to manage all this. Okay, cool.
So you can, right? So as an EOC, which we'll call it from now on, right, is that it doesn't have to be this big multiple people, hundreds of people all in this big center, right? And managing an emergency. It can be a simple thing as like in this example where I brought in all key stakeholders, everybody that needed to be involved in this problem. So right, as an Army officer, having my training, being a commander, being a brigade logistics officer, I've seen this before, right? So now I need to figure out, as soon as I know the issue, right? Now I know what my mission is. So now what did I do? I got everyone who needs to be involved, everyone who's involved in the process, not only before me, but also after me, right? So that we can react quickly. So what I did was simple thing, got a group email, got department manager involved, got the production control planning involved. They were the initial ones that, raised the flag. I had the logistics personnel involved and also operations involved. So with that email chain, when I sent out RFQs to suppliers, right? Anytime I got important, pertinent information, I quickly had them on an email, giving them constant communication, constant updates. So another thing is, right, as soon as I sent out these RFQs, requests for quotes to all of these suppliers, I was capitalizing on my supplier relationship, right? I contacted my all-star suppliers, told them, hey, we have a situation here. Our line is down, our production line is down. I really need your help. When I've developed these relationships with these suppliers, they immediately responded, right? This was about a 3 or 4 hour endeavor, but a lot of my suppliers were constantly communicating with me. Every
So
single supply.
this is like your second string suppliers, right? The first string had the
Yeah.
deal and they dropped the ball, so to speak. They fumbled it. Now you calling on the second string, the bench strength, to come in and pick up the ball and drive forward, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
those suppliers are the ones you're bringing on now, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
so that supplier, the primary supplier that we usually buy from, didn't have any stock, right? So you have to be able to pivot, and that's another important part of resilience, is be able to quickly pivot, right? To be resilient, to be flexible, right? Not to be just stuck. Oh no, that supplier doesn't have any stock. We got this shipment we need to get out. Okay, I'll just wait 3 weeks. That was not an option, right? So I was able to draw my relationship from those other suppliers, let them know, hey, this is truly an emergency. Can you help me out? And luckily, right, after going back and forth with a couple of suppliers, like I said, I found one. Luckily, in this instance, this supplier was still in Southern California, about 3 hours away, and had the stock we needed. So this was a Friday afternoon. The parts were supposed to ship out Friday afternoon. The final assembly is supposed to ship out, right? But the best case, we were able to think of an option. Usually we get product from a supplier, we ship it out the door, we get it in a few days with transit time, right? But we didn't have that luxury this time. We need to get this product out to our customer. It's already going to be late. So we came up with the idea, right, that since they're only 3 hour drive away, put those parts on will call for pickup. And we had a dedicated driver to come and pick up those parts for us, shave off an entire day of transit from from the supplier over to us.
And
This
also reduce your risk. That heaven
absolutely.
forbid you put it into the transit line where you have another company, FedEx, UPS, or whatever, and then all of a sudden the shipment is lost. And that's happened before. I've experienced that too, right? Okay, UPS is going to deliver it. Well, once you got into the UPS chain, it was not a priority for UPS the way it is for me. So by
Yep.
taking charge of it and making it, this is my problem, I'm going to solve it. That was pretty good. That's a good call.
Yeah, right. And so since you've already set up our EOC, all key stakeholders, everyone involved, so already constantly getting key updates. As soon as I found that supplier that had those already in stock, we'll call, communicate that to the team, right? The planners are all getting that ready, getting the build ready, right? Getting the technicians ready. We have logistics setting up the courier to go pick up the stuff, right? And then we got receiving, also able to start preparing to receive that product. First priority as it hits the door, right? It doesn't get in line like with all the other product, goes front of the line, gets it out to the production floor, and we're back in business, right? Just having that quick setup like that, having that EOC setup, drawing from my experience, it was such a prime example. And one thing I wanted to hit on this is it doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be a big geopolitical issue, something simple as this, but following those key principles of having an emergency operations center, having everybody who needs to be involved constantly updated, communicating back and forth, right? Executing the plan can really help out. And this is a great example of that. Another thing I wanted to hit off, right, is that a lot of us focus on the big obvious things, right? Like, oh, maybe we need a big casting part, or, we need this multi-$1,000 part before we can start to build. But, it's a simple thing as a screw or a 10-cent nameplate. The product is not complete until all items are on and put on and installed on that assembly.
Spec is the spec.
Yes.
If it says have a screw, it needs a screw. If it says a nameplate, it has to have a nameplate.
Or it's
And a
not
low,
complete, right?
it's not, the customer can reject it, right? You're
Mhm.
not going to deliver it because it's not going to meet the spec in the accordance with the contract.
Or what they
And
paid for.
yeah, and then as you were describing this, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in product waiting to be finished based on a 25-cent screw, something very tiny, making a huge impact on your organization. And what I like about when you're talking about this scenario is that it wasn't the blame game at that moment. We didn't go after the supplier to hold them accountable for not having the stock, right? Because we didn't know the root cause yet. That wasn't the issue. We're not here to dive into the why yet. We got to solve the problem. It's like, okay, yep, it's not on the floor. We got to solve that problem. Why is it on the floor? Not going to answer that question right now. We're going to worry about that later. We got to get this screw. So then you move. You took hold of it. You notified the right people. Everyone was up, as we like to say, at that moment. It was a Friday afternoon, Friday morning. And then, everyone's looking forward to the weekend. And this 25-cent screw is like going to screw us all. And then it's like, okay, but everyone's like, okay, I'm not worried about the ball game. I'm not worried about my weekend anymore. I got a 25-cent screw situation, and everyone's waiting, right? And everyone's thinking as well. So as you get information, you're feeding it to people, and they're responding. They're waiting for a response. So when you said, hey, I found it, it's 3 hours away, you sent it out, that logistics arm, that person, that driver, that courier was teed up. Okay, hey, you're going to go, and they're ready to go. And so they got a Friday assignment for a Monday morning move that they had to go and execute. So
another thing, Randy, I wanted to add to this too, right, is that an EOC structure like this really also, when it's critical, response time is critical, right? When you need to move quickly.
Yeah.
So a lot of times supply chain issues or disruptions require quick reaction, just like when we go back to that COVID example, right, with the toilet paper, right, or any kind of shortages, right? It was the companies that were able to react quickly and scoop up the rest of the inventory. Because sometimes, right, if there's not any more coming in and there's only a limited amount of inventory left, just like in this example, right, a customer could have easily came and got all those screws, right, and we would have been out of luck again, and we would have never even known, right? But because we're able to set up an EOC, get communication, get the requirements for what we need, assess the problem, and have a solution, right? We were able to react quickly, get what we need, and get it back to us all, within a day, 2 days.
Yeah, and faster than the competition, because your competition needs that screw too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had to get it before they got it because they were probably running short as well. So it's like, once you ran short, let me solve that problem, because your competitor is also saying, okay, we're running short. And so you got that 3,000 before they got it and came in the back way. So you were able to do that. So it's a great story. What I want to do now is kind of step back from that, talk about the structure of an EOC. That way you kind of see how Howard was able to put this together. Again, it's on his experience and training and education that was able to do this rapidly. And that's why we're here tonight, is provide you with this education and training. So we're going to lay out the structure, and then we're going to go back through the process and show how the structure was keyed up all the way through his response. And the structure I want to talk about is what we call S shops. In the military, they're called S shops. As a staff shop, F shop, S shop. And we have 6 of them, and each one has a specific function, and each one is responsible for that function. And to make sure that when a problem arrives and the commander has to solve that problem, in this case it would be Howard was the commander of that to solve that solution. He has levers to pull that he can use to solve that problem. And the S shops are: S1 is admin personnel, S2 is intel, S3 is operations, S4 is logistics, S5 is civil military affairs, and S6 is communication. Now that's the military structure. Howard, why don't you kind of draw the line between the military side and the industry side to kind of, so people can kind of connect the scenarios there.
Right. So, going back to the staff thing, right? This is key because these are all key functional areas, like Randy was saying, for levers that a commander, whoever's in charge that needs to make a decision. These are the key critical areas usually that they need to know in order to provide a solution. So, for example, going back to S1, admin, that's the same as human resources in the civilian side, right? They're managing manning, making sure that the right people are in the right spots, making sure, right, hiring the right people, making sure that the people that their strengths are in the correct spots, right? That they're not somebody who's incompetent in a position, right? Because it's always a team effort. It's an organization needs to run smoothly. Then you have S2, which is intelligence. This can be things such as what's actually found in your MRP, material requirements planning system, your key performance indicators, KPIs, and also sales does also provide levels of intelligence from the market. Then there's S3, operations. Mainly every organization has operations. In my instance, it's production. And then you have logistics, which is the same S4. movement of material, making sure the right product in the right place at the right time. S5, civil military operations, which is public relations and marketing. And then you have S6, communications, which is our always lovely IT department.
The IT guys, right? That's where
Yeah, that's
they're
right.
responsible for everything, right? Because everything, if we can't communicate, we're not getting things done. So
Right.
yeah, so that's good to draw the line between the two. And so as you're listening, you're kind of drawing that. It's like, S1, human resources personnel, the right training, the right experience, the right people in the right positions to make decisions, right? So that's happening before the incident, right? But when you go into the scenario, Howard was, who do I need to contact to resolve this issue? He set up his own S1 shop in his head and said, who are the people I need to talk about? Thus was that first initial email that went out to people, right? And S2, Intel, is the MRP ERP system, which gives them the alert. And that's when someone called Howard and said, we have an alert, some information that says we have a problem. And that came to Howard. And he says, okay, I have that Intel now. And then he went to validate that Intel, right? And then S3, operations. So he's reaching out to not only sales, who the customer is going to be in touch with, but also production in regards to what exactly is the urgency of this. Do we have to have it in 3 hours? Can it wait till Monday? Can it wait for 3 weeks? What's the urgency on this? So you're talking operations to know exactly what the priorities are, because this isn't the only problem in the organization. It's just the one that's at the top of the list right now. Once this is solved, there's going to be another one that bubbles up. So what is the priority, right? And then logistics is your suppliers, having that second, third, fourth string, second, third, people in the back ready to step up when that primary got hurt, got taken off the field. It's like, okay, you don't have what I need. Step aside. We got to solve this problem. Then we'll talk about your rehab, right? And then but you had to build that. We'll talk about you're building that second string here in a second. And then civil military ops or marketing and PR, because if this doesn't succeed, it's going to have an impact on your reputation. So you need to know how that message is getting out there, especially with social media nowadays. If that somebody doesn't get what they want, what are they going to do? Ding, they blast it out there. So you got to have them, they're up and aware, so they're ready to receive phone calls or handle things. And then ultimately S6, having the structure up and running. You and I have talked many times about IT. Everything's run on your bandwidth, your network, your phones, your computers, your cloud, everything. Well, what happens if that goes out? You sent emails. When emails weren't responded, you picked up the phone, and when luckily the phone worked, but if the phone didn't work, the next step was to hop in a car and go talk to people, right? Because the communication needs to get there. If they are not responding, pick up the phone and make sure something happens. Does that all make sense?
Yep, makes sense to me.
No, but definitely, and the other part is, Howard handled this whole thing with his internal team. It was well rehearsed. Relationships were established based on years of development of trust and credibility, not only with his internal team, but with his suppliers. Because really, to think about it, your suppliers, when you said, hey, I need screws, they could have been, screw you, but you didn't have that relationship, right? They, for some reason, knew you were serious. So why don't you kind of talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a very important part, is that relationship enabled this solution to be developed and solved.
Yeah. So one of the things, going back to relationship, which is a key part of resilience, as we saw, with going back again to COVID, right? When your supplier has a limited amount of stuff, right? Do it again to the guy that always yells at him, always asking for the lowest price, trying to hammer out the best possible savings for them, right? Or they're going to go with the person who treats them with respect, who has collaboration approach, that's always willing to work with them, not only looking at price, right? Really to help out as well. It's a two-way relationship. And I think this really showed in this example, right? So going back, right, the primary vendor did not have any of that material available, none of the screws left, right? So I had to go to 4 secondary suppliers. At the same time, right, I'm also ordering other parts from these suppliers. And then I don't always give the purchase order to the cheapest supplier, right? I always look at best value, and I always keep resilience in mind. This is a key point right here, that resilience is a constant thing. It has to always be worked on, because if you're not working on resilience and there's an emergency that comes up, you're already way behind the ball, right? So or behind the curve and all of that. So right, having this resilience, making sure that I, evenly disperse purchase orders, that I'm giving it to the best value. I'm letting people win the work. So when I come and say, hey, I have an emergency, this is a no kidding, I never do this, they know, man, wow, Howard really is in a tight bind. I really like this guy, respect this guy. Let me help him out. And that's how it turned out.
And it's that relationship, right? It really is. Can't stress that enough. The days of beating up the vendor and getting the lowest price at any cost are long gone, because vendors have a choice. Because it's who's my best customer, not only who is my customer. I need more market share, but I want to work with the best customers. And when I'm short, I know those customers that help me develop are going to be there with me when I go on. So I need to take care of them. So really, really good. And so we kind of drew the lines between the two shops and how it kind of flowed. And next thing I'm going to do is going to walk through the process on how it all developed, so that, you kind of see how the process, the workflow works. So we built the structure. Now I want to talk about the flow of information that ultimately developed the solution. And the first step is we call the alert, or the red meatball. Somebody was notified that there's a problem. There's no screws available for this product. So we sent out the alert. That alert went to Howard. Howard immediately took ownership of it, and he developed options. His options were, he started with S1, he notified all the right people. Next thing, he validated the problem. How many screws do you need, and how soon do you need them? That's intelligence. S3 is operations. What's the impact on the customer, and how do we mitigate that impact? One, we find the screws as quickly as possible, and we're also communicating to the customer to manage expectations, so they don't expect it to be on time when we know it's going to be late. We need to get out in front of that. And then as for your suppliers, keyed up. So you contacted 4, right? You said, hey, you 4, you're not my primary, because my primary is not there. They failed. I need to work with you guys. So they were up and ready to go. And then you're managing information, talking to the customer, talking internally, talking to the suppliers. And then, marketing's all monitoring this communication with the customer and how it's going to impact the reputation of the company. And then S6, that communication lines were open. The computers were working. The phones were working. You were able to go and fire it away. And then you selected an option. You found a supplier 3 hours out. You developed some options. You select the best option. You got the detailed planning, and then you confirmed, yep, we can get it on Monday morning. You check with the production or operations. Said, is this going to work? It'll work for us. It'll work with the customer. It'll work for them. Good to go. Because had the customer said, no, we can't wait, then somebody would have been on Friday afternoon going to get those screws so that they could work on Saturday to get this production done, to deliver it on time for the customer, whatever that time might be. And then you execute, right? And then once you start to execute, then you're implementing supervision and leadership to make sure that it doesn't fall through the cracks. And that's where you sent a driver to get the stuff, and then they came back and that you did it. You didn't leave it to chance to go into the logistics system through FedEx or UPS or anything else. Even though they do have 1-day shipping and other things, there's cost there, plus there's risk. You're not the only customer on that truck.
And it wasn't fast enough in this instance.
Yeah,
still wasn't fast enough.
Still wasn't fast enough. Still wasn't fast enough. So that's kind of the workflow, how it rapidly, and within hours, they save hundreds of thousands of dollars of product from being late and keeping it on track and delivered to the customer. So, Howard, what are some of your thoughts on how could this have been done differently, maybe better for the future? What are some things that you would do different?
Oof, so you got me.
Well, it's a good kind of the thought, the after action, which now is the why, right? It's like, okay, why did this happen?
Oh, we can talk about that. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
I
a
got
little
it.
bit about the why, so it doesn't happen. One, it doesn't happen again. If it does happen again, it doesn't happen as dramatically as it happened this time, right? So, what are some of the key learning points in this scenario?
Well, in this instance, right, we're able to drill back, peel the onion on what the actual reason for this emergency. Well, we're going back, talking to on the production floor. So these screws, not every single unit uses the same amount of screws. It's what is called a as required item. So it's up to the production guy on the floor as they're consuming the product to make sure that they're inputting that information into our system that shows inventory, right? So that by the time it hits a minimum level, the system knows that, hey, we need to get going and order some more. Unfortunately, in this instance, that wasn't being done on the production floor. There wasn't the discipline of consume and adjust out of inventory. So that morning, right, we look and there was an adjustment out of stock that went below the minimum threshold. And if you think about it, now that creates an instant emergency, right? It could have been as we were going, could have known about this weeks ago, but because of the inability to have that clear guidance on how much inventory we really have, right? That was an immediate emergency.
A good point for this is that it was a people issue. Millions of dollars, I'm sure millions of dollars are spent on your software systems, your ERP, MRP, whichever kind of system you're using. It's always up to date and all the data's in there to give everyone the reports that they need. But at this point, there was a point of failure in that the people weren't doing the proper data entry to keep the system up to date so the system could work for you. So, and then people, not software, people had to implement a solution. So as people are leaning forward with AI coming out and solving all these problems that, computers can only do what they're told to do, and that there are going to be failures because a computer can't look in the bin and say, hey, I'm missing screws, or maybe it can, but then that's extra money, or that's extra, you got to still hire a camera to look into the bin. And how many bins do you have? So people were still involved in this, and people failed, and people had to solve this problem. So that's another point of understanding this process and this workflow, is that as software fails, people have to pick up the slack and be able to solve these problems. Because if you just let the computers handle it, they'll just sit there and wait for instructions, where instead of take the initiative or understand that, hey, you have alternate suppliers. How do you program that in? How do you know that supplier is still in a good relationship with them? Which one is these best suppliers that I can actually tap into that relationship, right? So these are all good learning points that people need to, think about, is that it's not just a software problem. It's a people problem, and people are still involved in this process. So
People are the solution.
Yeah, people, not software, are the solution. What's another key learning point? Do you think it would have been as well responded to had you not had the right people in the right position? So training and education, was that a key part of this? Training, education, and experience before today is really that, that before that moment enabled you to solve that problem. So,
yeah, definitely. So right, going back to especially with my military experience with dealing with urgent situations and emergencies, right? Being in the military, we deal with that all the time. Having the aptitude to be able to step back, assess the situation, and follow that key EOC structure, that I've learned in the military, that I've been teaching and talking about for years now. It's really helped, and this is such a prime example of that, right? Even though it was, like I said, it was at my level, it wasn't this big corporate issue, I was still able to follow those steps, provide that framework, and able to provide a quick solution, right? Going back to needing that sense of urgency, needing a quick solution by following that framework, right? We're not spending all my time trying to figure out what do I need to do next, or how do I solve this problem. I was able to use that framework and spend more of my time trying to resource that product rather than figuring out what do I do next, right? Like we call violence or the objective, right? Move quick, fast, shoot, move, communicate, do it quick, and get it moving.
I think this highlights the value of somebody who's in the military or transitioning out of the military, how they could transition into this career field, and their ability to remain calm and focused during chaos makes them a good fit for the supply chain career field. And we speak to that. The reason I bring that up is that, one of the things we work with our Army folks in getting their CPSM certification. And when we take that Army military experience to be calm in the face of chaos and mirror and lay on top of that supply chain knowledge, then they're able to listen, learn, and understand the problems, and then really focus on what needs to happen. So you're not only did you have a military background, your supply chain degree from Auburn, I really don't know how much that was worth anyway, but then you had the CPSM certification, which is really valuable. You got to make sure you have that. That makes sure that you're able to lay all that on top of this. I'm a Gator, that's why I can talk bad about Auburn.
Sorry to hear that.
Exactly.
But you know what the thing though is, Randy, too, right? That's also the SOP, right? My standing operating procedures. I was able to go back on that and come up with, like I said, have that framework on how to approach the situation quickly, calmly, and get a solution.
And that's what, this framework that we're talking about here, that's what we're going to be teaching in our workshop in April as we kind of come to the end of this webinar. And we've given you a lot of information, but we know it's not nearly enough for you to take this on to action. That's one of the reasons we're doing a workshop in April in Los Angeles, near LAX, the actual location, the venue to be announced here in the near future, will be available for you to go through, and we're going to walk through all of this, okay, in detail, setting up your intelligence, setting up your SOPs, practicing with hands-on experience, going through, and how do you build an EOC? What does that look like in your world as a buyer, as an individual buyer? You need to build an EOC, an emergency operations center, for every single crisis. So that's not a crisis. It's just a response. It's just another thing that's done. And then you do the after actions to make it, coming up. So that's kind of towards, the end, as we're kind of getting towards the end of this, the workshop we're going to have in April. And then next month, we're going to do our leadership in crisis webinar, where we talk about what we alluded to, where, Howard took control of the situation, led multiple cross-functional teams, not only internally but externally with the suppliers. And that takes a certain type of leadership that is not go in and crush them, right? It's go in and influence and focus on what needs to happen. We're not in the blame game, we're in the solutions game. Let's focus and keep things moving. And that's what we're going to be talking about next month. So you want to come and join us for the webinar in February, where we're going to, further develop this scenario, where now you've got all the other webinars we've done up to this point. We've talked about the tools, which is your intelligence, the different processes, the risk matrix, developing the tools in place. Now we've got you in place where we have a structure, a workflow. We have a structure for you and a workflow. The next step is to put leadership in there, where even if you don't have military experience, and I know we're talking about military experience, but leadership is everywhere. And anyone can develop leadership through education, training, and experience. And when you come to the workshop, you're going to get the education, training, and experience, because we're going to have scenarios that we can run people
And
through.
practice.
And practice the experience side of it, right? That's where we're going to practice in scenarios so you can make decisions as an individual. And then we're going to take the group and put them together, so we have to respond to even bigger situations. So, be on the lookout for that workshop announcements coming up here really soon. So also want to make a shout out to our sponsors, supplychainmanagement.jobs, SCM.jobs. Make sure you go to that website, post your resume as a supply chain professional so companies can find you. And employers, companies that are looking for supply chain professionals, make sure you go there and post your jobs, because that's going to get you your best chance to find the most qualified candidates in supply chain management. As well as, make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe, like, and share this video with your colleagues so they can learn to develop these skills as well. And you can talk about them at a team meeting, at lunch, or something else, so you can further make this capability a strategic capability within your organization. So, Howard, with that, any final thoughts?
Yeah. So, resilience, like I said, it's not only something that when there's an emergency, then you practice resilience. This to be a constant thing. Me and Randy practice resilience every day, especially in the supply chain world. In our industry, we need to make sure that we're always resilient and always keeping that in mind. It needs to always be maintained, right? So supply chain resilience. And another thing is, right, especially in this EOC structure, a lot of the things, the principles we teach can be done at any level of the organization, from the CFO to the CEO, down to me as the buyer, down to the guy on the production floor, down to the janitor. Anybody can use this framework that we're using.
Yeah, very good point. It's a framework. It's a means and a process, right?
Mindset.
It's a mindset. And once you have that urgency and that, failure is not an option mindset, these are now some of the tools you can use to make sure that that doesn't happen. Very good. Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time, Howard. Your story was great. Break it down for everyone. Make sure you comment and let us know what your thoughts are. Be again on the lookout for the workshop coming up in April. Look forward to meeting you there and having a great time practicing what we're talking about. And we've done this over a series of webinars. If you haven't seen those other webinars, definitely go to our YouTube channel, Supply Chain Management Jobs, and watch those webinars there. I'll make sure I put links in the description. You can just go ahead and tap on those and watch them at your leisure. And it's really been a pleasure presenting this information to you, and look forward to seeing you all here in February in our next webinar, Leadership in Crisis. All right. With that, have a good evening, and we'll talk to you later.
See ya.